Tom, a very good evening to you. Muhsin al-Fadli, he is declared dead. He was killed in a vehicle in Syria, near Sarmata, Syria. You report that he was part of the Khorasan group. We'll recall that the airstrikes first launched by the Obama administration, this back in September of 14, also included the Khorasan group as well as the Islamic State. What is the significance of killing an operative at al-Fadli's level? Good evening to you, Tom.
The Khorasan group, of course, is just core al-Qaeda. It's just a cadre of core al-Qaeda veterans who were dispatched under orders from Ayman al-Zawahiri from around the world to Syria to, among other things, plot attacks against the West. And Muhsin al-Fadli, the Kuwaiti you mentioned who was killed, or the Pentagon says was killed in these recent airstrikes, basically was one of the top guys in their external operations arm in terms of planning these attacks in the West. And he's somebody who's long been hunted. Now, what's really curious about this, John, is that, of course, in Syria today, as we well know, the Iranian regime and its proxies, its allies, the Assad regime are on one side, and al-Qaeda and its Sunni allies are on the other. Well, what's really curious about a character like Muhsin al-Fadli is that he's someone who led, according to the Obama administration itself, the Treasury and State Departments, since July 2011, have said that guys like Muhsin al-Fadli, and Fadli in particular, led at one point the al-Qaeda network inside Iran, and this network exists under an agreement between the Iranian regime and senior al-Qaeda leaders. So this is a guy who was actually operating in Iran in 2012, right before he relocates to Syria in 2013, and of course he's then opposing the Iranian regime and its allies in Syria, and eventually gets killed by the U.S.
Working with Iran, for Iran, at the behest of Iran, without Iran's knowledge, does this evidence in an ability of Iran to know its own enemies, or is this witting, Tom?
No, there's something going on here which we haven't solved the puzzle, but there's some calculation going on here. When Fadli was in Iran, this was most certainly not something that was just happenstance or happened without the knowledge of the Iranian regime. In fact, the Treasury Department in 2012 made it very clear. Now, just for the audience to understand, the Treasury Department and State Department, when they come out with designations, these are designations that are cleared by the entire U.S. intelligence community. So the intelligence that goes into these designations is very sound. It's very firm. This is not something that's just sort of set off the cuff. And what the Treasury Department said in 2012 is that Fadli, when he was leading this al-Qaeda network in Iran, not only did the network exist as part of the agreement between the Iranian regime and al-Qaeda, but in fact, senior al-Qaeda leaders, including Fadli, had to let Iranian authorities know what they were doing in Iran. Otherwise, they risked being re-imprisoned. In fact, Fadli at one point was imprisoned and was let out to run this network. And this is something that benefited al-Qaeda and potentially still benefits al-Qaeda to this day. And we do not know why the Iranian regime allowed him to go to Syria eventually in 2013, but they did. He goes to Syria in 2013, and of course, he's involved with the forces, including al-Qaeda's branch there in Syria, that's actually fighting the Assad regime and fighting Iran's proxies.
I emphasize that the United States, administration after administration since 1979, have been very clear that Iran is the chief state sponsor of terrorism. What Tom is reporting is that Iran continues in that role no matter the suspect's secret nuclear weapons program. Mr. Roggio, a very good evening to you. A mysterious, comprehensive report about the Islamic Jihad Union and offensives being launched out of Afghanistan, not only against the government forces, but also against Pakistani forces. Is this a new group? Good evening to you, Bill.
Good evening, John. No, this is actually a well-established jihadist group. The U.S. designated the Islamic Jihad Union as a terrorist group in 2005. It is basically an offshoot of the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan, which is another designated terrorist group. And both groups are closely allied with al-Qaeda. You might even call them regional branches of al-Qaeda, if all but in name, because they haven't sworn allegiance publicly, at least, to al-Qaeda's emir. Both of these groups the Islamic Jihad Union itself is very dangerous. It has a lot of Germans and Turks and then fighters from Central Africa, and they released a report on its website noting, its activities in Afghanistan, and it says it's fighting alongside its brothers in the Taliban. It's operating in multiple provinces, and by the way, they're provinces that the U.S. military has said it's targeted this group from between 2007 and 2013. So while you have administration officials still continuing that Al-Qaeda and allied jihadist groups are a shell of themselves inside Afghanistan and Pakistan, these groups continue to be highly effective, still fight alongside the Taliban, which administration officials want to negotiate with, and they remain part of Al-Qaeda's generalized network well over a decade, and it's just these groups have not gone away, and as we're withdrawing from Afghanistan, they're becoming more powerful.
And striking against the Pakistani troops in North Waziristan, is that significant, Bill, that they can project power across borders?
Well, actually, where they fought the Pakistani military in Mir Ali in North Waziristan, that's that remote tribal agency where Al-Qaeda is based and other jihadist groups are partially based from. That town where they fought the Pakistani military, that's where the Islamic Jihad Union and other foreign terrorist groups, that's where they primarily operated from. The Pakistani military, though, in its offensive, I just want to be real clear about this, it's going on for over a year now. They're still fighting in areas where they've targeted. A lot of areas remain under jihadist control, and then the Pakistani military is only going up against groups like Islamic Movement Uzbekistan, Islamic Jihad Group, and the movement of the Taliban in Pakistan, but not other jihadist groups that support the ones that are fighting the Pakistani state. And so Pakistan is only selectively targeting jihadist groups that it deems to be a threat to its security.
Tom, quickly, the U.S. is claiming a kill of Abu Khalil al-Sudani in Paktia, that's in Afghanistan. But you and Bill report he is an Ayman al-Zawahiri veteran. Is this another Khorasan group, Tom?
Well, this is a guy who actually, in Al-Qaeda's pecking order, would be above the so-called Khorasan group. This is a guy who was about as senior as they come in Al-Qaeda's pecking order outside of the number one or number two. A very, very established Al-Qaeda veteran. This is a guy, as Bill and I reported, when you look at the declassified files that were recovered in Osama bin Laden's compound, it's very clear that this guy was considered by bin Laden himself to be one of his most trusted operatives. In fact, when bin Laden's son, Hamza bin Laden, was let out of Iran a couple years back, it was known that he was well protected as long as he was in Abu Khalil's house and under his protection, because this is a guy who was that trusted. So this is a guy who was very senior Al-Qaeda leader, a commander, a guy who planned suicide operations, very veteran explosives operative. This is a guy who was really well respected in Al-Qaeda, so it is a big get.
The airstrike, July 11th, Bill, did we get a confirm on Abu Khalil al-Sudani? Is there a martyr tape?
There is no martyrdom tape, but jihadists based in Pakistan have said that he's dead. I suspect at some point in time we'll get a martyrdom tape. Remember, we killed Adam Gaddan, who is an American, and who Al-Qaeda had every reason to promote his death. We killed him in an airstrike in early January, and just several weeks ago, Al-Qaeda actually confirmed it and released a martyrdom tape. So they're not as quick in confirming deaths as they used to be, but someone at the level of Sudani or Adam Gaddan eventually is going to get a martyrdom statement.
And Tom, just to underline this, Sudani is reported killed in eastern Afghanistan. That means that Al-Qaeda is strong in eastern Afghanistan. ISAF is left and Al-Qaeda prospers, correct?
Well, that's absolutely correct, John. The whole point is they wouldn't put a guy like Sudani in eastern Afghanistan unless they felt comfortable there. You know, as Bill's written, you know, the bottom line is that Al-Qaeda ordered top operatives, top leaders, top members to relocate to Afghanistan. And this was a big deal for them because this meant that they found Afghanistan to be once again a comfortable operating environment. So he wouldn't be killed there unless they thought that he had a good chance of success there.
That means core Al-Qaeda is comfortable in eastern Afghanistan. If we can kill one of the leaders, that presumably the organization is intact in eastern Afghanistan, correct? Is that logical, Tom?
That's absolutely logical.
Tom Joscelyn and Bill Roggio, the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. This is war fighting on a vast scale. And when we come back, we're going to turn to Africa because there's evidence, the methodology used there in several new countries, that the jihad is spreading. I'm John Batchelor. This is The John Batchelor Show. I'm John Batchelor. Tom Joscelyn and Bill Roggio of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. They keep the Long War Journal. And we're moving from Syria and Afghanistan to Africa. Bill, the report that you have up, your colleague Caleb Weiss is reporting three times from Africa. I want to start with the suicide bombers killing 30 in Cameroon and Nigeria. This is claimed by the Islamic State West Africa, which is Boko Haram. You report that they're using women bombers. Is that new to Africa, or is this something we've seen before? I know we've had a couple of female bombers in the Palestinian cause over the years, but I hadn't seen this before from West Africa.
Yeah, we've seen female suicide bombers in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in Iraq, Chechnya. So it's not uncommon for jihadist groups to do this. What Boko Haram has done is the Islamic State West Africa now. Since June of 2014, they've used 35 female suicide bombers. So clearly they are. If this isn't a one-off type thing where they see an opportunity, they clearly have infrastructure, easy access to recruits, to women who are willing to do this, or they're able to convince or coerce women and children to do this. So what this really tells us, they have a network for this, and it's extremely dangerous. The women are not being checked like men are. They're just, they could hide bombs under their burqas, or again, security forces just aren't as willing to search women as they are men in a lot of these cultures.
Bill, we have no information that any of these female suicide bombers could be abducted school children from Nigeria, correct?
I haven't seen any reporting on that. I wouldn't be surprised if it were true, but there just hasn't been any. There's no indication.
Right. Okay, just checking it off. Everybody paying attention now. This began as a story at the White House level in the summer of 2014. The abducted young females are still unknown. This is Nigeria, around Maiduguri, and there's a new government in Nigeria. There is said to be a transformation of the Nigerian military underway, much more effective than the previous regime and the corruption of the division operating in northeastern Nigeria more than a year and a half ago. One more story, Bill. Al-Shabaab operating in Mogadishu, an attack in the capital. Is this Al-Qaeda related, or is this just Al-Shabaab, the revolutionary group that operates mostly in Somalia but sometimes cross-border?
Yeah, Shabaab is Al-Qaeda's official branch in East Africa. And so anything that it does, it's doing under Al-Qaeda's umbrella, so to speak. And Shabaab continues to launch attacks. They love to hit hotels in the capital. This is where influential people or politicians and military officials, they all gather because they're a lot more comfortable than anywhere else in Mogadishu, which is no surprise. But the Shabaab has been very adept at identifying hotels where senior officials are and then targeting them. So, Shabaab, despite continuing to lose some territory, they just lost 2 towns recently. They can remain an effective terrorist insurgent group that's operating not just, as you said, in Somalia, but in Kenya and in Uganda and other places.
A VBIED, a truck rammed the gates before detonating. If you're going to go to the Jazeera Hotel in Mogadishu, you want rooms on the back side of the hotel, Bill.
Yeah, I think you just don't really want to go to Mogadishu if you're a Westerner, that's for certain. But, yeah, if you have to, you definitely don't want to be near that front gate.
Tom, you have a story up about a special forces officer in the Egyptian military going renegade to Al-Qaeda. Who is he, and is he a suspect in the assassination of a prosecutor in Cairo?
Well, John, he is. In fact, the assassination of the prosecutor in Cairo, what happened is in June, Egypt's chief prosecutor, of course, was killed in a bombing, and nobody claimed responsibility for this attack. Nobody, which is very suspicious on its face. And Egyptian authorities very quickly pointed the finger at a guy named Hisham Ashmawi, otherwise known as Abu Omar al-Mazri, who is a former Egyptian Special Forces officer. And lo and behold, he then releases an audio message with basically a short clip of Ayman al-Zawahiri, the head of al-Qaeda, and some other images in it, basically compiled into a video, basically saying that he's loyal to al-Qaeda and that he's now the head of a group calling itself al-Murabitun in Egypt. And our sources have identified him as the new head of al-Qaeda in Egypt. And this is very significant because you'll recall late last year, that this group in the Sinai actually pledged allegiance to Baghdadi, the head of the Islamic State. And this Islamic State so-called province in Sinai has been making a lot of noise. They are brutally effective, and they are one of probably the strongest parts of the Islamic State outside of really Syria and Iraq. And they've executed mass casualty attacks. Well, not all of that organization went along with this sort of flip from al-Qaeda's fold into the Islamic State's fold. Of course, the Islamic State and al-Qaeda are now rivals. And this guy, who we've identified here, is one of the loyalists to al-Qaeda who remains in Egypt, who is actually building up an infrastructure and executing attacks, including some pretty lethal attacks, according to Egyptian authorities. So it shows you that here in Egypt, as in elsewhere, the Islamic State and al-Qaeda are both represented, and they're both capable of some sort of devastation.
The puzzle here, Tom, al-Qaeda, does it have ambitions to compete with the Muslim Brothers? The Muslim Brothers are the ones who threaten the Cairo regime. Do the Muslim Brothers and al-Qaeda work together? We've got about 30 seconds, Tom.
Well, it's a very complicated story, and basically al-Qaeda has rejected the Muslim Brotherhood's compromised approach to entering into elections and pursuing the democratic path and that sort of thing, and said that that's not consistent at all with what they should be about, and loudly rejected them. I think a lot of people missed, however, that Ayman al-Zawahiri, the head of al-Qaeda, and other al-Qaeda leaders basically moderated their rhetoric toward the Muslim Brotherhood in the wake of the 2011 uprisings. And so there is the potential that there's more going on there.
Tom Joscelyn and Bill Roggio, the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy, they keep the Long War Journal. I understand these are complicated proceedings. However, this is the war that's going on right now. I'm John Batchelor.